Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show.
I'll hold back on political and religious statements.
Yeah, that why don't we start there? Okay.
I wouldn't anyway, so.
Okay. It's interesting. I would love to have those conversations. And I've always been told, like, stay away from those things, right? And I used to say, but like, whatever. Like, we're all mature adults. We can have a great conversation. Yeah. Over the last several years, I realized that's not the case. And sadly, even among artists and people who like to explore ideas, I find it tremendously sad that today we can't have open conversations because everyone gets so offended so quickly that then they think because they're offended, they have the right to go and jeopardize your income by, trying to get you fired or, coming against you, or, it just turns into this total grown-up version of monkeys throwing crap at each other. It's just disgusting.
I totally agree. And it's kind of sad that there's no real conversation possible anymore without everybody either getting personal or everybody taking stuff personal that wasn't, simply because you didn't agree with them. So And you know what, I sort of try to keep those things out of my art anyways. My art is supposed to make happy, rather than me digesting stuff through my art. For me, it's sort of my retreat. When I start painting, everything else stops. And I love that about it. I think that's why I'm so addicted to it.
That's so beautiful. I love how you put that, because when I look at your work, I see that. Some artists, when they paint, they're so focused on let's call it their reference, that ultimately they just copy the reference, right? And oftentimes the reference comes from a photo. And if the photographer who took it isn't an artist and he's just clicking a little button to capture an image, then too many times the image that's painted feels like the photo, which is frozen. It's frozen in time. And that's very, very different than an artist like yourself who has this still moment in time. There's a total difference. And the frozen one lacks life. The being still, there's still an incredible amount of life and animation in that moment. But you just feel still like you got to glimpse into this private moment.
Right. And I think there's also a difference if you work from, I personally prefer to work from life. So either on plein air when I go outside on location, or I set up my own little still life setups in my studio, simply because I can see the colors better. Photographs, they warp everything. The lights are too light and the shadows are too dark and too blue. And I don't have the patience to alter pictures in Photoshop so that they're exactly the way I would want to paint it. I know how to make it up working from a photograph, but I think the difference when you work from your own photograph, you still remember what you felt. There was something about the scene that made you take that photograph in the first place. And you don't have that when you work from somebody else's photograph. And, I also noticed that I have a huge idea folder. And if I wait too long to paint something that is in that idea folder, it just fizzles out. I look at stuff that I photographed last year. I look at it and I'm like, but what is it even that grabbed me? I don't remember. And I delete it because I don't want to paint it anymore. And, it's funny because my mom sometimes sends me pictures she found in a magazine or in a newspaper. And she's like, oh, look how cute that is. You should paint that. And I look at it and I feel absolutely nothing.
Wow.
There's no excitement. So I think, you really have to pick what you want to paint yourself and not just find somebody else's work, in form of a photograph, and work with that. I don't know. Personally, for me, that just doesn't do it.
I absolutely agree with you. So do you work right now currently primarily in plein air, or do you do a lot of still lifes? Like how do you do your work?
So right now, so I took 2 weeks off. I had brought my gouaches on a little vacation to Italy, which was a family vacation, and I ended up painting only once, and even then my heart wasn't really into it, and it sort of felt good to not paint for a while because I've been incredibly busy for the beginning of the year. But now I'm actually going to work the next couple of days on a series of food paintings for a food show, a local food show at the Cultural Council in Lake Worth here in Florida. Mm-hmm. And those are going to be studio paintings, but they're also going to be painted from life. So I'm, it's funny when I go to the grocery store, I don't go in there, basically buying food that looks good to eat. I walk through there and I'm like, ooh, look at all the subject matter.
I'll paint that and I'll paint that.
Look, that is so paintable right there, And it was actually kind of gross. Recently, I painted a painting of oysters.
Uh-huh.
And so I had bought myself oysters, ate half of it right away, and then painted the other half. And I now know why oysters are always meant to be kept on ice, because after 3 hours, after 2 hours, I started to get a little whiff of something. After 3 hours, it was just brutal. And I decided, okay, painting's done. That's it.
Wow.
One of them actually started to blow little bubbles. I mean, they're still alive when you open them,
Oh, wow.
And so that was kind of gross. But yeah, so I'm going to be painting food for a couple of days, and then probably towards the end of next week I'm gonna head up to Fisher's Island, which is a little island. I think technically it's the state of New York, but it's kind of wedged in between the northern tip of Long Island and Connecticut, and you get there by boat.
Wow.
And there's a gallery there. It's called Pandion Gallery, and they're throwing me a solo show.
Wow.
And the gallerist said that she wanted mostly paintings that had a local flavor, something the locals can relate to. And the oyster painting was actually for that show because they have oysters up there. And, I've never been up there, so I painted 11 paintings where I'm like, okay, seagulls. I'm sure they have seagulls. I painted seagulls. But I also told her I would like to come and do 4 or 5 paintings en plein air on location. And the gallerist was so nice. Her name is Diana Sargent, and she invited me to stay with her at her house so that I could paint for a couple of days.
Wow.
That is all going to be plein air. And so right now I'm just watching the weather, and when I see that there's going to be a stretch of a couple of nice days, I'm going to book myself a flight and head up there.
Nice. Wow, that's so cool. So cool.
And then I have another show, a 2-person show in October, and I still want to do a couple of fresh new paintings for that show too. And I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do. It's lately I've gotten into shiny things. I go through phases. And lately it's been shiny things. So I have a couple of tiny little baby shoes from my niece. And she has those adorable shiny little patent leather Mary Jane. So I've painted a couple of those from life. I just set them up in my studio, and I usually there's not a lot of conscious symbolism in my paintings, but with these little shiny shoes, I feel differently about it, because those are the shoes, she's taking her first steps in, and who knows where the whole journey, will take her someday, and how much fun she's going to have buying shoes when she's a grown up, if she has any of my DNA.
Which is woman DNA.
Exactly.
I'm a sexist.
Well, it's not necessarily a woman thing. So my dad, for instance, he has been to the war in Germany and all that, and, was very poor and didn't have anything. And when he was finally working and was done with his education and made money, he would spend a lot of money on shoes. He had this thing for beautiful shoes. And I think it was because he didn't have them when he was young. So it's really not just women, it's men too. And I noticed that in Italy too, in the Italian men and their shoes. Oh my God. Of course.
When I lived in Portugal, I got in a little habit. I probably bought more shoes in Portugal than I probably bought in my entire life. Where I was staying, right around the corner was this shoe store. And it was just crazy because of everything being so cheap there. I'd put on an outfit. I'm like, man, these shoes don't match. Like, they don't really. So I walk around the corner, like, buy a new pair of shoes, and I'm like, yeah. And I did that enough where I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. Like, it almost became slightly addictive. It was.
Yeah, it makes your whole outfit. It's actually, because my dad always had these beautiful shoes. I don't know if it's just, because I'm a woman that I love beautiful shoes, or if it's my dad's genes that I have. But it's my pet peeve when I see a gentleman beautifully dressed, looking really nicely, and then messing it all up with the wrong shoes, like the healthy kind with the rubber soles. I'm like, oh, come on, a nice pair of leather shoes would be so much better.
Well, they would agree, but I think most men are like, I just need, like, either a pair of sneakers or a dress shoes. Like, and if you're working, like, in construction or something, then you need some construction boots, But but yeah, I shoes are pretty cool. I'd love to find a designer and one day have custom shoes made one day. I would love to be part of that process. But so
I know we're getting off here on a tangent, but have you seen those? I think they're called Flukov. They're the coolest shoes. They make them in Seattle. You know what? I have to look it up. I'm not clear on the name right now, but I will send you a message later.
Okay.
And you have to check them out because they have really cool shoes for men and women.
And so when you were in Italy, besides looking at the shoes, normally we have this conversation at the end of this podcast, but we're going to do it this time up in the beginning because, there's nothing wrong with spicing it up. And we've been talking about food anyway. So when you were in Italy and you weren't looking at people's shoes, talk to me about the experience with the food there.
Oh, where to start? The food is the best. I actually, I'm sort of a cheese addict. So if you put sweets in front of me or cheese, I would go for the cheese. And one of my best birthday cakes was actually a couple of years ago when I was in Paris with my daughter over my birthday, and instead of a birthday cake, she had bought me this little goat cheese that she had carried around in her backpack in the heat all day the day before, so it was kind of squishy and shapeless, and she just stuck a match into the top for a candle because she didn't have a candle, I loved it.
That's awesome.
Goat cheese birthday cake. No, but so I'm a cheese addict, and when we were on the Amalfi Coast, I actually learned how to make mozzarella.
Mm.
So we found this cheesemaker whose family has made cheeses for 200 years, and he's still
Wow.
in the original building that used to be a church. His name was Biagio. That was
Piaggio.
in Ravello. And so my husband, my daughter, and we got to make cheese with him. And it was so interesting. I have even more appreciation for cheese now because the poor guy gets up at 3:00 every morning to make his mozzarella. It
Wow.
only keeps for about 3 days, so you have to make it fresh all the time.
Mm.
And speaking of birthdays and so on, a lot of Italians actually have him at their special celebrations. Like he does a lot of weddings where he makes mozzarella on location and people can eat it right there. The guy
Wow.
can actually make, I asked him, how many mozzarella balls do you make every morning? He didn't really answer that, but he said to me, I think he thought the question was about speed. The question was really about volume, but he told me that when he does weddings, he makes those tiny mozzarella balls, and he makes 800 tiny mozzarella balls in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes? I can't
Yes.
even count that. I can't even count to 820 minutes.
It's like 2 seconds for one little mozzarella ball. So yeah, that was really interesting, to see how that works. And I actually went on Amazon and bought myself this mozzarella making kit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to attempt to make it myself. And the other addiction I have is the limoncello there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Amalfi Coast is famous for its lemons. They have different kinds there, and they're also famous for their, what's it called? I think it's called majolica. The painting on the tiles and on the ceramics. It's mostly lemons. The lemons everywhere, and so I drank a lot of limoncello, and I'm going to make my own limoncello here at home because I got a recipe from a real Italian, and he told me exactly how to make it. And another thing that I got to try that I had never tried before, never heard about, is it's called colatura. It's anchovy juice, basically. Okay. So in Cetare, which is this little fishing town on the Amalfi Coast, they catch a lot of sardines and they turn them into anchovy. And basically the anchovy, they're sitting there in their salty brine for a really long time. And I think they're putting olive oil into it and whatnot. And the drippings, they catch the drippings from that. And that is basically concentrated anchovy juice. And they put it on pasta. They put it on bruschetta. I even had a martini with it. It was a dirty martini. And they had put a couple of drops. It's very intense. A couple of drops of the colatura into the martini, and I'm like, wow. It's delicious. So yeah, food is really, really important to the Italians and to me too. My mom was always a good cook, and I didn't really learn how to cook until I got married. And then it was more out of necessity because, we had to eat something. My husband likes to cook too. And it's really just by following good recipes. And I keep those, you will rarely eat the same dish twice in my house because I'm constantly trying new recipes. I love to try new recipes. That's and then we sit down and eat, and then we vote. We're like, keeper or not? And if it's keeper, I'll put it in my folder. And if not, it gets ditched. And the Italians, it's Naples is the birthplace of pizza, and then the Amalfi Coast birthplace of mozzarella, and also the food in Rome. It's everywhere. You can always get something to eat somewhere. But we also had a really good lunch in Ravello. It was not the typical Italian cuisine that you would find in a regular Italian restaurant. It was just a little bit out of the ordinary, like the incorporation of the lemons. I had this pasta dish. It was almost a little bit like a lasagna with ricotta in it, but they had put the lemon into that ricotta and was really nice and foamy. Oh my God, it was so good. And of course, I also like to paint food. In general, I like to paint what I like. I don't really think much about what might sell. Because every time I've painted a painting thinking, oh, that actually turned out nicely, that would probably sell pretty fast. And I'm still sitting on these. And other things where I didn't think of, what might sell, and I'm just, look how beautiful the light is on that, I'm painting it, and they're flying off the wall. So I stopped thinking about, what other people might like, because you just don't know. And so, when I paint food, it could be anything from donuts to, fruit. I've painted sushi. I've painted the oysters, cupcakes, all kinds of different things. I think I'm gonna paint some eggs sunny side up for that food show that I have coming up. Maybe with bacon. I could even make it look like a little face, like with 2 eggs and maybe the bacon strip like a mouth.
No.
So we'll see. Yeah.
Everything was cool. Everything you said was so cool up until that moment.
Sorry, did I spoil it?
Yeah, I'm not sure which is worse: smiley face with bacon smile, or bubble blowing oysters.
Yeah. Yeah, you could not imagine the smell. It was so bad.
So you're both French and German, correct?
No, I'm just German. It's just
you're just German. Your name is French. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's cool. And did you learn how to draw and paint in Germany?
Yeah, a little bit. Not the painting part, but definitely some drawing. So, my theory is that when you have that creativity, you're just born with it. Because whenever, I know a lot of other artists, and they all have one thing in common. They had that creative urge from a very early age on. Even if they didn't follow up on it until later, a lot of people, including myself, they started out doing something else, but that urge, it's still in there. And at some point, it just wants to come out. And so, I've always, when I was a kid, I was always creative, not just necessarily painting and drawing, but also building stuff. I love doing stuff with my hands, building stuff. And I would create these huge spider webs in rooms with string. It would drive my mom nuts, because she would open the door and, all she could see was string spun all over the room. And then, I ended up not studying art, because my dad gave me, I think it was good advice. He said, oh, you should learn something where you can make money in whatever country you'll end up in, which was sort of weird, because it was almost like he already had a gut feeling that I wouldn't stay in Germany. So I got my MBA, and I ended up working for a bank. And I was bored out of my mind studying economics and all the math and statistics and all that. And I actually survived by drawing comics.
What?
I was very much into cartooning. And so I drew, all my professors, everybody got turned into cartoons. And my husband still actually has some of them, because we actually went to university together. Oh, and then it was actually after we moved to the States. I did take classes. I took some figurative drawing classes back in Germany, night classes and so on, just because I needed some sort of outlet for the creativity. especially since I had to do with so many numbers, which is so boring.
Mm.
But anyways, when we moved to the States, I had a natural break in my career anyways. And I don't know, one thing just led to another, and I started a mural career. I got pregnant. We had a beautiful daughter who's an artist too. She's at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She's a senior there now, and she's doing animation. But anyway, so when I got pregnant with her, I decided to paint murals on the nursery, and had so much fun that later, over the course of the next couple of years, I ended up painting murals all over our house, and people would see it and would want it too. So a business was born. I never had to advertise, but people would just either see stuff in my own house or then in other people's houses and wanted some murals too. So I did that for 11 years while we lived in Chicago. And then we moved to San Francisco. And that's really when the stars all aligned. It was interesting in retrospect when you look back at stuff. I found this fabulous tiny atelier where you could learn how to paint. And I knew exactly what style I wanted to paint in, loose, impressionistic, with beautiful color and thick paint. And we had just moved to the area, and in this little local paper, I found a tiny little ad. I mean, it was probably like 2 inches by an inch. And it was an ad for the little art school. And I cut it out, and it was lying on my desk in the office for several months before I came across it again. And I decided to call them. And that was the beginning of a total, studying with those 2 women at that art school just opened up a new world. That's where it all started.
What school was it?
There. It's called Marin Art School, and it's led by Dorlin Davis and Jane Heafy, and I'll be forever grateful for everything they taught me, because it's interesting. It's not like college where you take art classes. They start you from the beginning. And in the beginning, it was a little bit of a hit to my ego, because I thought I knew how to do things. And, I had painted my murals and whatnot. And they start you with charcoal. They have you draw boxes. They teach you about perspective. And only then they start you with value, still in charcoal. When you get the value, then you're ready to move on to oil paint, but only black and white. So for a really long time, you're only going to do black and white studies. And then, when they feel you got a grasp of value, they give you a few colors. They start you out with a very limited palette. And as you get ready for it, they will add colors to your palette, so that you basically have a split primary palette, cool and a warm of the primary colors. And everything is from life. Everybody had their own little still life set up. It was very individualized. They would work with everyone at their own level. And then when you were ready with that, they would take you outside and paint en plein air. And they taught me really most of what I know. And they also taught me how to teach, because I teach classes too. And I really loved, I think my numbers background turned me into a little bit more of an analytical person. And I just have an easier time if somebody breaks things down into logical steps for me. And it's always been a little bit of a pet peeve for me if I go to a workshop and I ask a question like, okay, so why'd you pick that color for that area? When the artist would say to me, oh, I don't know, just because I felt like it. That was not a satisfying answer for me.
That's when you say, come a little closer. Do you hit them with your brush?
Yeah. No, I would want a reason for that. And when I teach my classes, I do what those 2 women at Marin Art School did. I can give everybody a reason for every brushstroke that I'm
Yep.
making,
Yep.
because they're done with intention rather than just with feeling myself along.
Yep. Yep. And I think in the art process, there's a place to be intuitive. And I think that's in the beginning of the process when you're conceptualizing and trying to, find that muse. And
Mm-hmm.
then, but if you stay in there, then I just feel like you lose power, because when you can when you can tap into that source in an intuitive way and then guide it into a place where you're becoming very deliberate and intentional, in that you can become consistent.
Mm-hmm.
When I used to look at the work of Norman Rockwell, I used to ask myself, how does he consistently win? You know, it's not like, oh, I did a great painting and I'm not going to do another one for 6 years. It's like, no, he got someone calling him on the phone. Hey, we need another great one by next week. Okay.
Yeah,
And,
I agree.
and so, yeah, I think that's brilliant that you had that experience. I'm sure being a German doesn't hurt you, having that little German sensitivity or sensibility. Um, the Picasso once said that the best place to learn to draw is in Germany.
Ah, really?
Yeah, and
Oh,
I think
interesting.
it's because of that very analytical nature that Germans have, that very precise,
Mm-hmm.
the precision um, that them and the Austrians have. Uh, as a German, being raised in a place um, that was so, I would say, structured. I have friends who live in Germany, so I'm not just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like pulling this out of the air.
Okay.
um, and being a highly creative person, did you feel that you could not exist in that place, that you needed to get out? Did you always feel like you wanted to get out?
No, not at all.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I moved away from Germany when I was 28, I think, 27 or 28, and
Okay.
it was basically just because my husband and I were going on an adventure.
Nice.
We weren't planning to stay away forever. It just seems like it's shaping up to be like that. Um, my husband and I, we both live our life in a not preconceived way. Um, we sort of like to keep our options open.
Mm-hmm.
And if something pops up, then we're both ready to jump into the opportunity with both feet. And, the reason why we ended up here in the States was a rainy Sunday where I read the job ads simply because I was always curious to see what kind of jobs my bank would offer to the public, as opposed to trying to find somebody within the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw this ad, and it was exactly what my husband did in Germany. And I said, oh, look at this, it's for the States. You should apply. So he applied just for fun. And 2 months later, we were moving to Chicago.
What?
And, and yeah, and for us, it was like, I don't know, going on a vacation, because we approached it with a curious mind, and we saw it as we treated it with that mindset. If we like it, we stay. If we don't like it, we leave.
Nice.
And we're still here. After a while, you just grow roots. And for a while, I mean, I don't know how long you have lived in Portugal or in other places, but maybe you can relate to that. For a while, you are in that twilight zone where you do love it in the new place, but you feel sort of nostalgic about, your home country,
Sure.
and you're sort of undecided. Both countries have stuff you really love, but the other country has stuff you like better, or maybe there are things you don't like as much. So you're kind of torn back and forth. And after a couple of years, you'll get over that, and you will start to really feel at home in your new place. But it took a long time, but we love it here, and I don't think we're going to go back because we've really grown deep roots here, good friends, and of course the whole painting thing. And I think the States are a really good place to be a painter. With that whole plein air movement right now, however long it may last, I'm sure at some point it's gonna fizzle out, but right now it's fabulous. And I know this one painter from Italy. He's a wonderful, wonderful watercolorist and really good at oil too. His name is Francesco Fontana. And he consistently comes to the States to participate in plein air events and teach workshops and whatnot. And I asked him once, he comes from a country where there's so much art and, all these ancient things. And he said, well, but there's nothing going on in regards to plein air. There's no opportunities for him. So he has to come over here to participate in all these things. I thought that was really interesting.
From my understanding, I think Ireland is really the only place in Europe that does plein air. I mean, that's really outside of the United States. I mean, of course, people do it everywhere, but I've talked to several artists who brought that point up. And it's surprising because you can think of something like Italy. I know in Portugal, like they had incredible landscapes, just gorgeous, the color, the shapes, all of it. But for some reason, it seems that plein air is very much of an American thing.
Well, I think there are plein air painters there, and there's certainly a large amount of places in France and Italy, especially, and Portugal too. Where you can go on artist retreats and take workshops to paint on plein air. But the events that we have here, all the competitions and so on, plein air, stuff like Plein Air East and so on, I think you're right. I mean, I really only know about that big one that they have annually in Ireland, and then a German couple who bought a painting from me. They told me about a plein air festival that is somewhere in northern Germany, but I assume it's more of a local thing and not an international thing. Because I had never heard of it, but they must exist, but I don't think, to the extent they do exist here.
Wow. Every time I hear this, I'm, business ideas go off in my head. We need to organize something.
Mine too, because we stayed at the most charming bed and breakfast on the Amalfi Coast that I had found through this big coincidence, because we actually planned this trip very short notice, and the whole Amalfi Coast was pretty much booked solid. And we usually like to stay in Airbnbs. We just rent a place somewhere. Especially since it's the three of us, it's usually cheaper just to stay in an apartment or a small house. And there was just nothing, or at least nothing that didn't have 150 steps to climb up to get to the place. The Amalfi Coast is very vertical, I'm telling you.
Wow.
And so I had called this one hotel to see if they still had rooms, and they're like, no, we're completely booked, but we have our good friend Roberto, and he has this charming bed and breakfast, and you should give him a call. So it turned out he had a room for the three of us, it was big enough, it was a room in a little separate area where they could fit another bed into it. And oh my God, the views from our little terrace, it was like we were suspended between the sea and the sky.
Wow.
And bougainvillea everywhere, and I'm looking around, and every morning Roberto and his wife Nada, they make this Italian style breakfast and best coffee and cappuccino for you, and you sit out there on the terrace, and I'm like, this would be perfect for a workshop. So I'm already negotiating with him, and
that's awesome.
putting all the details together, and I would love, love, love to teach a workshop there next year. It's in the making. So I can relate to you when you say, you have all these business ideas popping up in your head.
I may be able, if you're interested, get you another contact. One of my students has a friend who spends about half the year in Italy, and she
Mm-hmm.
has a bed and breakfast out there.
Mm.
And she wanted to do something for the town. And so what she was envisioning was starting an amusement park for handicapped kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought to myself, well, how in the world would that even work? Although the other day I saw an amusement park open up for handicapped kids.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I guess they figured it out somehow. But
Mm-hmm.
with this lady, I remember we were talking, and I suggested that maybe what you could do is have like a retreat for artists, because where she was located in Italy, it was a very easy drive to all of these major places.
Mm-hmm.
And so so yeah, who knows? If you're interested, I could probably get you the contact information.
Oh, I would love that, because I'm always looking for beautiful places to take my students, and I don't like to go to a place with my students that I haven't seen before.
Hmm.
It's kind of difficult,
Sure.
to just pop up there and know where the beautiful painting spots are. So with
Yep.
the Amalfi Coast, I've been there and we've been all over, and I was taking all these mental notes and taking pictures, paying attention to if there are bathrooms, if there's shade. So I've got it all figured out. We ate in adorable, very good restaurants. But to have an address, that somebody else has tried out before, or they know that, that it's beautiful there, that is definitely helpful. Yeah, I would
Awesome.
love to have that contact.
That'd be good. That's cool. So we'll talk about that after the podcast gets you set
Sounds
up with
good.
that. Um, when have you been to Italy more than this last time? Have you been there before?
Oh yeah, plenty of times, because living in Germany,
Sure.
you go to Italy because you can drive. I'm
Oh
from
wow.
Berlin. But I was born in Berlin, and then I lived for a couple of years as a teenager there. But for the rest of the time, we were in Bavaria, so close to Munich.
Mm,
And so, you're really close in driving distance to Austria, to Switzerland, to Italy. You just hop in the car, drive a couple of hours, and you're there.
yeah.
So, my brother and my back then boyfriend, who's now my husband and my boyfriend, we like to go windsurfing. So we would drive to Largo di Garda, go windsurfing there. We would drive to Livorno, get the ferry to Sardinia to go windsurfing there. So I've been all the way down to Calabria, which is the most southern part in Italy, but I had never been in Rome,
Mm,
because when we still lived in Germany, Germany has a lot of bad, drizzly, damp weather. So when you have a vacation, you typically seek out warmer climates and
mm-hmm.
a beach. So oftentimes when we would go on vacation, it would be a beach vacation. But now I live the beach vacation, because I live in Florida, two
Mm-hmm.
minutes from a beach that's like, I don't know, 50 miles long and really beautiful and warm
Wow.
water. So for me, it's a treat now to be exposed to a little bit of culture, to cities rather than another beach. So that's why we went to
You're all
Rome.
beached
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I'm all beached out, and that's why we went to Rome this time. But yeah, I had been many times to Italy, also to Tuscany, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and it's
Yeah.
just so beautiful, and the food and the people and the wine, of course.
Oh man. You're not only making me hungry, but making me want to travel. Ay, 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 ay. Um, so, so you're working right now. You're getting ready for a show up in
Mhm.
northern New York. Um, it was in. Did you say San Francisco is where you went to
Yeah,
study? with the feelings?
After we lived in Chicago for a decade, we moved to San Francisco.
Did you feel like you were suspended between the air and the cliffs up there, like with all the hills?
Yeah, I did there too. I mean, that was really that little bed and breakfast in Amalfi. But interesting enough, you know what? It's interesting that you say that, because where we lived in San Francisco, we lived north of the city, just across the Golden Gate Bridge. Whenever we move, we rent for a year to get to know the area, and then we typically buy a house. Yeah. And so we had rented a house in Tiburon on the hill with the most fabulous view. Out of my kitchen window, I could see the East Bay, you know, over to Berkeley. And then from some other rooms, you know, we would look over to the city, and I could even see a sliver of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so, yeah, we were sort of suspended there between sea and sky as well. And then we bought a house in Mill Valley, which we absolutely loved. I mean, we really did not want to leave there, because it's a real little town. You know, there's a real town center. People hang out in the cafes. I think it's almost a European lifestyle a little bit there. You know, a lot of people walk, a lot of people ride their bicycles. There was a great sense of community. And our house was, again, you know, up on a hillside, sort of tucked away. You know, it would have been perfect for somebody in the witness protection program, because the road going up there, oh my gosh, it was so windy and steep. And I mean, you could really hide up there. And I loved the smell, you know, when you opened all your windows and we were in all those, you know, redwoods, you know, it would smell so good. Yeah, so we loved it there. But that's really where it all started, you know. And you know what, interesting enough, I can actually pinpoint the day when I decided I was going to be an oil painter. So we were in Carmel, you know, just for a long weekend. And I think that was actually even before we moved to San Francisco, interesting enough. I think it was for a birthday, and we met up with my brother who lives in California, and we met in Carmel. And I walk into this gallery, and I see this giant painting of a San Francisco street scene with a trolley in there, and was by Ken Oster. And so I always tell people it was really him, you know, it's his fault that I became a painter, because I looked at that painting and it was the most delicious painting. And I loved it so much. It was so interesting, because when you stood close to the painting, all you saw was really masculine, almost crude, very dynamic, big, bold brushstrokes with lots of paint on them. And then when you step back, it all gelled, and you saw this atmospheric, beautiful painting. And I don't know, I just stood in front of that painting, and I'm like, wow, I have to learn how to do this. And and then, I don't know, later I signed up for a workshop with Ken, and stayed at my brother's house, and, you know, took that workshop. And I'm still grateful to him to this day. I mean, sadly, he passed away last year. I'm still destroyed about it, that there will never, ever be another new Ken Oster painting, because I love them so much. And he was just the nicest guy, so patient. I mean, here I am, a complete plein air rookie, a complete oil painting rookie. I'd never painted in oil before, because all my murals, they were acrylic painting, pretty tight. You know, when you do those trompe l'oeil and all those things, you know, you have to be a little bit tighter. And so he started us out in the studio for 2 or 3 days, and then we had 2 plein air days. I didn't even have an easel, so I went to Sam's Club and I bought the cheapest French easel that I could find. It was $36, and it was a pain in the butt. You know, because I tried to set up that easel, and the screws were falling off, and I'm on all fours, you know, sifting through the sand, trying to find my screws. Then I had forgotten my palette, and he gave me his, and I'm so grateful that he never laughed at me. You know, he usually, oh, it's going to be okay. You're okay. You just take mine.
I would have laughed at you.
I would have laughed at people. Yeah, I mean, it was just great, and he instilled a lot of principles in me
Hmm.
that during this first workshop went straight over my head. Um, because when you learn how to paint, you have to be ready to hear what the instructor is saying. And a lot of it, I wrote down every single word he said, and
Mm.
it was about 3 years later, after I had started at Marine Art School, that it all made sense, what he
Mm.
said. And yeah, but that day in Carmel, in front of that painting, that's when I knew that's what I needed to do.
That's awesome. And your work has incredible strokes. Like they're huge on some of them.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and so everything you described when as that hit you, that experience,
Yeah.
was very interesting because those were the kinds of things I was noticing in your work.
Yeah, and
Uh,
also what you said before, we were touching on how there's always a little bit of an intuitive process too, which is
mhm.
what gives the painting uh, a little bit of your own personality rather than making it look like just copying a photograph or copying what's in front of you.
Mhm.
And Ken Oster put it perfectly. And to my work, it still applies to this day. I have taken so many different workshops, Victor, but some teachers more than others have influenced me so much that I keep going back to what they taught me.
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
I'm still taking occasional workshops because I think I would be very sad if I had the feeling I have learned everything I can learn.
Yeah.
And also some principles you neglect, and then you go to a workshop and you're like, oh yeah, I have to think about that a little bit more again. But what he always said is that making a painting is like a sandwich. You start out with the intellect, which
Mhm.
is, and I think you're very much into composition and design. So, he says that the beginning of the painting, you have to take it on an intellectual level and work out your design and your composition so that
Mhm.
it's going to be interesting. And then once you've got that down, you block it in. And then comes the passion part. That's where you get to let loose. You're applying the paint, you're applying
Yep.
the color. It's more from a place deep within. But then when you're done with that, you're going back to the top of the sandwich, which is the intellect again. It's almost like the intellect is the bun, the top and the
Yeah.
bottom,
Yeah.
and the passion is the middle part. And then you go back, and the finishing touches on your painting, of course, should be check where your eye goes. Does it move around or does it slide off the painting? Does everything lead to your focal point? Do you maybe have to soften some edges? Stuff like that. You go back to that intellectual checklist and
Mhm.
check the painting, and then you're done. And I think that's such a great way of putting it, that you have to go a little bit back and forth. And, who put it brilliantly too is Picasso, who said, uh, learn your skill like a pro so you can, or learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist, which is
Yeah.
exactly what Picasso did. Because when you look at very old work by Picasso, it's very beautiful and very representational.
Mhm.
And then once he had learned and mastered all of that, that's when he started breaking the rules, and he started with, putting the eye where the ear goes and stuff like that. And I totally agree. And, I always tell my students that I'm only there to fill their toolbox. I just want to give
Exactly.
them all the tools, teach them everything you need to learn to know the technical aspect of making a painting. And, of course, when I say these things, I'm talking about the kind of art I'm making, which is representational.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it might be differently with abstract art. I don't know enough about those, that to speak for everyone. But when you are a representational artist, You have to have a certain skill set, because it's also a little bit a craft. But then, once you have all those tools, that's when you can start to put your own person into it and let your style emerge.
Do you desire to make every painting have deeper meaning, tell a greater story, and be better than your last painting? Well, let me recommend a strategy to achieve just that. I recommend every artist take time to study the great master artists and illustrators and how they composed an image. Uncover their secret design formulas that makes their artwork successful. Now, if you want a little help doing that, I'll direct you to an incredible free resource at artdesignworkbook.com. That's right, I created a 177-page workbook for artists with lessons and drills that will teach you how to see the secret design formulas by master artists and illustrators. So go to artdesignworkbook.com and download your free art design workbook right now. There has to be a process where you go through, where you become self-aware and you realize what it is that you want to communicate, what it is that you want to produce, and then you use the tools that help you do that.
It's so much easier to figure out what you want to do if you know what tools you have at your disposition.
Yeah. And and it's interesting because I think, sadly, I think a great number of artists are kind of like guitar players, right? They may be able to hear a song and play it, that's kind of more like copying. And they may be really good at playing that one instrument. But then there's another kind of musician who knows music, can write it, can read it, can lead it, can conduct it, understands the instruments that are involved enough to know why they're different, how they're different, and how they can relate and play together. And then they become a composer of music and then also a master conductor. And they're orchestrating an orchestra, a symphony, and it's just a very, very different level of skill, Not saying that the guy at the subway playing the guitar and singing isn't awesome, but there's just a refinedness, and I think that's where we talk about art, and then there's fine art. There's a fineness to it, a refining to it. So I was looking at this Ken's work, because when you mentioned him, I had to go look him up. It's funny, I didn't know who he was, but I have been impressed by this guy for 20 years now. I'm looking at some of his paintings. I'm like, oh my God, like that's that. Like that's the painting that I saw in this place.
Really?
Yeah. Where it's representational, but because of his process, it's not very tight. It's really, like you were saying, big strokes, and there's gorgeous color in there.
Yeah. And he's a master of simplifying. He knows exactly. What I always find really interesting is, when you read, like Plein Air magazine, for instance, when you read, when you see photos of the painting and what the scene looked like. I always find that really fascinating, to see how people simplify, how they make one thing pop out a little bit more. And he was so good at it, like if there was something, if there were trees in the background, he would just make them in this, grayish green and just make it one big shape. And everybody knows it's trees. So your brain knows, oh, okay, there's trees. Without him painting a single tree limb or a single leaf. And for me, that makes the painting really interesting because there's stuff to discover. It's not all spelled out.
Exactly. I call it painting for the peripheral, meaning like if you look at things out of the corner of your eye, you still can tell what they are. Or it's like I remember when I was taking drawing classes when I was younger, my drawing master would say, imagine seeing your friend across a parking lot, and all you saw was their shape, their silhouette.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you knew it was that friend by the cadence of their
Yeah.
movement, by the shapes the combination of shapes that they were.
Mm-hmm.
There were no details, and
Mm-hmm.
yet there was, quote unquote, an aura. There was
Mm-hmm.
an arrangement of elements and ingredients in such a way that only was them.
Yeah.
And I
Which
think,
is interesting because
mhm,
human features, um, they vary only in a minuscule way.
yeah,
The relationship between, let's say, the forehead and then eyebrows to the upper lip and then, mouth to chin. It's really tiny, tiny variation. So also, the neck, the length of your neck, basically the little things that make you, you.
hmm
Um, or even the height of people. When you paint a crowd of people,
hmm
everybody is almost the same height. I mean, it's just really a matter of a couple of inches.
yeah,
And I think it's just really amazing that, just like you said, that you can make out somebody who's far away from you just by their gesture, by their general shape and by the way they carry themselves,
hmm
and how you would recognize them in a large crowd of people just by that.
When you said about the sandwich,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because he said it's intellect, intuition, intellect, or let's say intellect, passion, intellect,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was thinking about that, and I'm like, and then you said about Picasso, and it's weird because I almost invert it. I always think it's intuition or like passion, right? Then intellect, and then passion again, but it's controlled because it's kind of like a hybrid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realize I don't think it really matters. The point is that you give space for the left brain to function, the right brain to function, and to have this dialogue in between,
Mm-hmm.
because it's when they overlap that the art occurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just not academic. It's just not passion and intuitive, ness,
Mm-hmm.
ness,
Yeah, it's
ness.
neither. Yeah, it's neither only one thing nor the other. It's a combination. It's like a dance,
Indeed.
back
Yep.
and forth. Sometimes you dance forward with your partner, sometimes backward,
Yep.
and yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting that you said that for you it's almost an inverted process, but I think you're right. Actually, you've got a good point, because I think that the spark
hmm
for to make a painting, I think that comes also from somewhere deep. So
Yeah.
maybe that should be the plate for the sandwich.
That'd be awesome. Actually, it's funny you say that, because if we look at it that way, like when I teach design and composition, the first thing we go over is what I call story. And the story is the purpose or the function of the work. We always ask, like, if you're going to create this thing, what is it that you want the end user to feel or experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, in a weird way, it doesn't matter if you paint trees, or they could be flowers, trees, pencils, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The question is when someone stands in front of that image, or it comes into their reality, what is the experience that you want them to have?
Mm-hmm.
And then building it back, really, from almost like the finished, and then building it back. And so I like that plate idea, because the number one question we always ask at every step of the process is, how does this decision, if you're going to start a line here and end it there, and it's going to be on that diagonal, or you're going to make a brush stroke like that, or you're going to choose a value relationship like that, or a temperature relationship, like, how does it support the story?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't answer it, you're not authorized to make that, to make that mark.
Yeah.
you know
You know what I sometimes do with my students? Um,
What's that?
And they usually resist. But I always have these great suggestions and then nobody follows through. Not just kidding. But when I notice that they get a little bit too tight and they elaborate on everything,
Yep.
then I ask them to write on the back of the painting what it is that made them want to paint it. Like, I teach a weekly plein air class from fall throughout winter into spring because, most of my students are snowbirds, so nobody's here right now. But so when we go out to paint, there's so many different things and they pick one thing. And I think it's just easier when you write it on the back of your canvas so that you have a reminder for yourself what the focal point is so that you can elaborate a little bit more on that rather than on the little sandpiper here and a pelican sitting there and the clouds and whatnot. Otherwise, it gets too busy.
When I was younger, we used to have a pool table, and my brother Jim was really, really good at pool. Still is. He was so good. I actually enjoyed playing him, even though I think I beat him once out of like 300 times we played. But when we played, we would play 8-ball, and the rule was you had to call the pocket,
Yes.
top right corner, and the ball had to go in there. If you didn't call it, then you were not, you were playing a different game, which half the time, it would go in a pocket that you didn't intend it to go into. And so I used to love losing to my brother Jim because at the end, he would say, pick a pocket. And I would try to find the most difficult shot for him, but he would always make it. So
oh my God.
when I'm teaching, like, and people, we go through the story stage and I have to, show a student how to move an eye. I'm like, pick a place, like it doesn't matter where it is. If you know how to control the eye, you can make it do anything.
Yeah.
And so what I have them do, and you might want to encourage your students to do this, before they begin, write that statement on the back of that one liner. You may even break it down to 3 words. Okay. So that way, what's beautiful is the group holds you as the artist accountable to the muse because artists are really good at bullshitting people, right? Oh, this is what I'm feeling now. You just sucked, you ruined it, you messed up, and we're not gonna, tolerate that. So, but if you have them write it down from the beginning, then my students have this experience all the time. Someone who doesn't know the subject or what the experience that the artist is trying to do comes along and they have the experience. And I would say almost 80 to 90% of the time, they almost say word for word what the artist wrote down before they ever drew a mark.
Oh, interesting.
And the confidence in the artist, it shoots out of the roof. Like, holy, what, So yeah, I really encourage, if you do that with them, just have them do it from the beginning, and that's
what I usually do. They have to pick something and then they just write on the back of the canvas, what it is, that drew their attention.
And the key is to have them focus on the verb, not the noun. So to say a piper is not, a sandpiper. Ultimately, that's the context, and that's what they may paint, is that little bird. But don't let them put a noun. So it might be the bouncing of the way it jumps through the sand, right? That, because that's what we experience, right? The piper just gives context to it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that to capture the feeling of a place, that comes a little bit later. So that comes after you learn how to draw and how to mix color and how to create depth and distance in a painting and atmosphere. Yeah, I think that you have to have those tools first, and then later, And I think there's no shortcut to this. I think you have to go through phases when you learn how to paint. I think it's just natural.
I would push back on you on that. I would challenge you on that thesis.
Because you have to, if you're trying to capture the moment, the feeling of the moment, it's just people have to get past that stage of copying the scene. They have to know how to paint certain things before they're able to pay attention to really more to the feeling of it. And I wanted to add one thing to something that you said earlier, where I would push back a little bit.
Awesome.
Was when you said you have to think about what kind of experience you want the viewer to have. I kind of gave up on that concept because I usually, I'm in a studio co-op here in Tequesta. It's the Village Art Studios, and we are 26 artists in there, and about half of those actually have working studios in there. So a lot of times I meet the people that buy my art. Also when I do the plein air events, I usually meet the buyers of my art. And I always try to extricate why they're buying that particular painting, because there's so many others they could buy. I think on average at these plein air events, like the Winter Park one, there's probably like 350 paintings being produced during a week. Some larger events, it's even more. So there's a lot of choices. So I'm always curious, why this painting? And it usually has nothing to do with the reason why I painted it. And so for me, it's really more letting out my joy of painting, me challenging myself to capture the feeling of the moment, rather than thinking, okay, how can I make this exciting for somebody else to look at? Because, the best example, I have a couple of examples actually. One is, I had done this plein air painting of a little girl wearing a red lifesaver vest, climbing into a canoe.
Oh, right. A red lifesaver. Okay, I thought you said lightsaber, like what are you painting with a lightsaber? That's awesome. I want to see that painting.
Oh, that would make an interesting thing, actually. No, it was a life vest.
Yes.
And the woman who ended up buying the painting, she had seen the painting somewhere and then didn't even contact me until 2 months later. And the painting didn't sell for a while. And the former director of that art center where the exhibition was, she said, "Your title is too vicious. You have to change the title." The title of the painting was Gator Bait, because it was painted in a local preserve here. There's alligators and everything.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. You're in Florida.
And she's like, nobody's going to buy it with that title.
That's a funny title.
You should title it Canoeing with Grandpa. And I'm thinking, over my dead body, it's going to stay Gator Bait. So anyways, the woman contacts me, and and we have that conversation while she's buying the painting. And she's like, "It reminds me of my childhood." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, did your parents take you canoeing a lot?" And she's like, "No, but I always wished they were." So,
wow.
So it was basically because she never, her parents never took her canoeing, and she always wanted to. That's why she had to have that painting.
So you proved my point with your story.
I do?
Yeah. And the person said, change it to painting with Grandpa or whatever. And she's like, yeah, I wish somebody took me canoeing when I was a kid. No, but
what I'm saying is, you don't know what kind of emotions you're gonna stir in somebody else.
Why did you paint that painting?
Why did I paint that? Because I love the light on that little girl, and because I'm like a hummingbird, I love red stuff. Apart from the shiny things we spoke earlier, and yeah, there were, I don't know.
Okay, so you love the red stuff. But what was the feeling that you were trying to capture in that moment?
It was just this warm summery day, and this little girl, who was about to have so much fun. But when it comes down to it, it's about the light. For me, it's usually about the light.
Okay. Was there any other figure in the painting besides the little girl?
No,
Okay.
because it was pretty. I pretty much zoomed in. I mean, in the live scene, yeah, there were other people, but I didn't put them in because it was plein air. So, and she was moving, so I really only had very little time to
Yeah.
paint the whole thing. So I just threw it on the canvas, and that was it. But I just loved the light. How she had blonde hair and was wet. She must have been in the water before, so it was really. Well,
Cool.
maybe it was shiny too. I don't know.
Shiny.
No,
It's shiny.
I
You're like
love.
a crow.
I
It's
know.
shiny.
No, it's magpies. I'm a magpie.
Okay.
Um, no, but for me, it's usually when do you know that feeling when you see something and your heart skips a beat and you're like, I gotta paint that.
Yes.
Those moments are usually triggered for me by an interesting pattern light and shadow make.
I would agree with you. That's I was reading a quote, something about shadows and how they draw you in and trigger emotions in people.
Hmm.
But it's really because of the shadow, it also tells us what the light is, right?
Yes.
So
Hmm.
it is this beautiful relationship that occurs, and I think this is why, in like the Japanese, they have notens, which are just these
Hmm.
black and white designs,
Yep.
and you're building your story or your artwork on that really base level of black and white. It's
Yes.
binary, and does your image work at that level?
Yeah.
That simple level.
And
Uh,
that's how I usually work too. I before I even start painting, I have this tiny little notebook, and I have three value markers.
yep.
A light gray, middle, and a darker, and then my fourth value is the white of the page.
Hmm.
And sometimes I just do a note hand just to organize my thoughts in
Yep.
regards to where light and shadow are. And sometimes I do a four value study. And even though my notebook, I think it's 4 by 6, um, when you leaf through it, you won't be able to recognize what the drawing or the value study is off because it's very abstract.
Hmm.
But you'll see if it works or not.
Indeed. Yep. Yeah. We call it carrying power.
Yeah.
The ability to carry that image across a room or
Yeah.
across, catch
Mhm.
you. So that's awesome. I your challenge against me, which you still haven't won yet, but um, let me just say it this way. I always say, and I think it's because of my illustration background,
Mhm.
what's the end user, right? What do they want? But or not what do they want? What is it that you want them to experience? In saying that, the truth of the matter is where you get the answer, that answer is from what it is that you're experiencing, right? And so if you're experiencing um, this moment, and ultimately you're going to communicate this visually, if someone else comes along and they don't experience that same moment, then in my opinion, personally, you fail to communicate, right? That doesn't mean that they won't pick something out of the image or have some emotional connection to it or buy it or anything like that, right?
Mhm.
But what I really really try to encourage people to do is feel what it is that you feel and then articulate that visually in a way that other people can experience that same moment or at least close to it. And um and
Yeah,
so it's
that statement you just said, I totally agree with. Not the one though that you made before, that you start the process thinking about the end user. My
well,
my
I don't
opinion,
see any difference in the two.
um, I do because when I paint, it's more about what grabs me. In that moment, I really don't think of somebody else or if they're gonna like the subject matter. And then again, like one time, I have this little red car. It's a beetle,
Hmm.
and
That's cool.
there was this beetle sitting on my beetle, and it was bright green, and it looked like it was made out of metal, and it was all shiny again, of course, and very iridescent. And I took a picture. I zoomed in, took a picture, and painted that. And so for me, I'm like, oh wow, yeah, look at the shadow on it, and the green, and look how shiny, and the colors, and so on. I thought it was fascinating.
Mm.
Other people, they might look at it and they're like, ew, it's a beetle.
What?
So you know what I mean? So you just don't know what you're going to evoke. I mean, yeah, I think
That's
it's
true.
important. I think it's important to have a really clear thought about what you're trying to say,
Hmm.
but how it's being perceived by somebody else, because these people have their own experiences. Like, let's say, you're painting your pit bull, and you think he's so cute and cuddly, and the light is just right on him and whatnot. Somebody, and you think the painting turned out really well. Somebody else might look at that painting totally differently because they had a bad experience with a pit bull. So that's why I'm saying, I don't want to think about what other people might like. I just want to, I find something that I like, where that fascinates me, that pulls me in, and that triggers that urge to put that onto the canvas. Whatever happens afterwards, if somebody likes it or not, I don't want to spend any thought on that before I paint the painting or while I paint the painting. And
Cool.
and it makes me really happy when somebody comes along then afterwards, and they have to have the painting, and they want to buy it and take it home and want to look at it hanging on their wall every day. But that's almost like a pleasant byproduct.
I agree with you. We're standing in the same place. It's like if you looked at our shadow, you couldn't tell the difference. Well, you could probably tell because my shadow would be a lot wider than yours, probably. Um, but but we're standing in the same place on that thought.
So
Like,
we picked the same pocket.
yeah, yeah. Um, I would never encourage people as a fine artist, let me say, I would never encourage a fine artist to get up in the morning and say, okay, what am I going to paint that will sell to other
Mhm.
people? Right. It's
Yeah.
not, you're not producing a product for someone else in that way. These people, you, you're communicating an experience that you have. And that's where you have to start.
Mhm.
And so from that place, you and I are saying the same exact thing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah.
I think it's difficult to not think about what might sell, especially when art is your only means of supporting you, or maybe you even have a family and a couple of kids and whatnot.
Sure.
And um, when you know that you have to make a living with it, I think it's very difficult, to not think about what people will buy and how you're going to make money with it. But I think I don't know. I think the art that looks like the artist has painted it just for their own pleasure, they just look more appealing. I sometimes notice that with commissions I do. I notice a little difference between commissioned paintings and paintings that I painted just because I want to paint it.
Hmm.
Um, the commission work is usually a little bit tighter,
Hmm.
um, because oftentimes I'm working maybe with a photograph that somebody provided for me. Just recently I did a big painting of somebody's boat,
Hmm.
and my customer, she said to me, everything has to be very exact, because she had bought that boat with her husband a couple of years before, and they had themselves completely restored it and renovated it, and they knew every little screw and every little thing. So it had to be very exact. So I sometimes with commissions, I feel like I can't be as playful as I would
That's a
be with my own art.
that's a great word, playful. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one thing creating a work of art and having someone appreciate that and want to take it home versus someone coming along and saying, I'm your boss now.
Yeah.
Right. And then you got, there's an expectation and there's some ambiguity to it, like, are they going to, there's a little fear, like, are they going to reject it, things like that,
Yeah.
and all that kind
It
of,
has never happened to me, but I'm always super nervous,
yeah.
before showing people the finished product. I sometimes, if they want it, I send them a picture of my underpainting, and usually people are familiar with my process of painting. I've studied with a bunch of colorists and I've tried other processes, but that approach works best for me. And I find that the colors are the most luminous when I paint with that technique.
Mm-hmm.
Where you basically start out with a very bright underpainting. So really pushing the color, and then you go over it and you tone it down a little bit, as much as you want, or you don't have to. But sometimes I sent them a picture of the underpainting. I did this huge commission of a painting for a brand new golf club. It was for the clubhouse, and it's the centerpiece in their dining room. And I painted the golf course. There's a water feature with trees reflecting and whatnot. So my sky was pink, my grass was orange, and the interior designer who had commissioned me to do that, I sent her a picture, and I'm like, "Are you ready for this?" And she's like, "Yeah, hit me with your underpainting."
With your underpainting.
Yeah. And it looks, I mean, it totally reads, because the values and the temperatures
Absolutely.
are sort of, I mean, the values are definitely correct, because this way I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to think about them anymore if I nail them with my underpainting. But yeah, it's always interesting, how usually they already like it, even though the colors are, the not the right ones yet.
Yeah, but that's the reality. 80 to 90% of a painting is not its color.
Yeah.
It's its composition, its
Mm-hmm.
design, it's depending if you're representational, that skill, its values, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, once you can manage all those things and people, they can see it. And then with the color, you kind of get to have that really playful experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like a Sargent painting. A lot of people will say, oh man, he had these brush strokes that were wild. Yeah, but it doesn't mean his whole process was wild,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was
Mm-hmm.
like he created, it's like a child without boundaries can't be free because it doesn't know if it steps here, if it will be in trouble or not. So
Mm-hmm.
by giving it boundaries, then it can play to incredible degrees because it knows it's permitted to.
Oh, I
And,
love that metaphor. Yep, that is so true.
so now, I usually don't talk about color, but I'm going to talk about color with you because I'm looking through when I was looking through your paintings, I kept seeing these two, I don't want to say colors, but they're almost like an energy that's coming out of the painting. And there's usually like this very high key, lime green color, right? That's coming out of your work. Even like, let me go back to your site here. Um, there's either like like a lime greenish that's coming out, or this pink that has maybe like a little bit of a peach in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you even have both of them coming out, and those ones I kind of like. Ooh, I feel like I'm eating a blow pop,
Are they yummy?
Yeah, it feels yummy. That's the great word for it. And so therefore, it's like, to have that kind of playfulness. I like that word, playfulness. in your color, but within the constructs of good composition, good design, great value, these other sensibilities, it makes it like I can then appreciate your color, that you're in color intelligence.
Thank you.
And I'm not a colorist. It's something I don't really spend much time with.
Mm-hmm.
But when the other things are working and that pops out, I I just have this. It's kind of like eating at a really fine restaurant and then all of a sudden getting like this incredible dessert at the end, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So
But
where does that come from? Where does that pink and that lime greeny color come from? That yellow green.
Well, I like I said, I work mostly alla prima, which means, wet and wet,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still a layered process. So, like that pink with that peachy color, that comes often from, sometimes I start with a pink and then put a little cadmium red with white or a little bit of yellow over it.
Mm-hmm.
So my first layer is a thin one, not necessarily thinned down, so that you see the white canvas through it. It has enough pigment already so that it covers. But if I put a little bit of mineral spirit into my paint, it'll tack up pretty fast. And also that first layer, it's just, I'm not building up paint yet, because if I started out too thickly and then put another color on top, it's very easy to make mud, because that next layer, once I'm done with my underpainting, the next layer, it has to be applied with a different brush stroke, where you hold the brush more parallel to your canvas so that you deposit rather than scrubbing it in. When you're trying to scrub it in and you hold your brush at a 90-degree angle to your canvas, that's usually where you pick up too much of that underpainting color and then it just turns muddy. But let's say if you started out with a pink and then mix a little bit of white into a cadmium red light, and then you brush that on, with just one brush stroke, wipe your brush if you picked up any of the underpainting color, reload and put another brush stroke on there. That's when you get what's called a broken line, where the paint doesn't cover perfectly, but there's little open specks. And that's where you see that underpainting color shine through.
Nice.
It's just a way of creating a certain luminosity that I have not been able to create with any other technique of painting. That's why I keep coming back to it. And with the lime green, I think that's the influence of Florida here, because it's sunny and beautiful every day, and everything is just in your face, bright. And so I found that the most whatchamacallit, a green that just pops off the page is if you take a yellow that's on the bluish side, like a lemon yellow or cadmium yellow light, your cooler yellows, if you mix them with a blue that also has a little bit of yellow in it, that would be, phthalo blue or your cerulean blue. They lean towards the greenish already. So if you mix those two and maybe a tiny touch of white, I'm always very careful with the use of white, because it's your coolest color on your palette. And as soon as you add it to any color, you will not just change the value, but also the temperature and the intensity of your colors. So, with all the old colors, like all the cadmiums, and God, I'm blanking now. If you all the mineral-based colors basically, and heavy metal-based colors like your cadmiums, if you add white to them, you will dull them.
Mm.
But with the modern colors, all the synthetics, like the phthalo and the quinacridones and so on, the, what is it? Is it Hansa yellow, the artificial one? If you mix a little bit white into these, you will actually increase the chroma. It will be even brighter. Or quinacridone. Oh my God. My all-time favorite color is quinacridone red. It comes out of the tube looking pretty dark, but then if you add a tiny little bit of white to it, it's the most brilliant pink you've ever seen.
Mm.
And I like to wear lipstick once in a while. I just want to smear it all over my lips. It just looks yeah. So anyway, so this limey green is really just a cool yellow mixed with a blue that's leaning towards the yellow as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was looking at your painting of the four boys with surfboards,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, here it was. I found it very strange because it's so pinky, and yet these four young strapping lads are going down to the water, right? And it still feels very masculine, right? But but I'm like, I would look at it and think to myself, a woman painted this, right? There's just some, but um, but it's probably one of my favorite paintings that I've seen, and I was just like, wow, we're totally gonna have a conversation about color because there's so much going on, and it's in these little subtleties, and it's also coming from underneath the painting out, and so you kind of walked us through that.
I think the I remember it now what you're referring to, because I think it's mostly the trees in the background where you can probably see a little bit of a pink coming through.
A little bit,
And
yep.
the reason why I painted it that way is when you have greenery that is closer to you in the shadow, I always differentiate between something in the shadow and something in the light. I don't think in terms of dark and light too much. I think more in terms of light and shadow. And so the pink that you're referring to, it's in those green shrubs and trees that are right behind those boys. That's all in the shadow, but it's pretty close to the viewer. So I wanted to make the greens look cool, but have a certain warmth underneath. And whenever I'm trying to create that effect, I will actually put a dark reddish color underneath my greens, because it will just warm up that bluish green a little bit that I'm going to put on top. If these trees were really far away, you would see that they would look much, much bluer than when they're a little bit closer to you. And I would probably work with a different color for the underpainting just to cool them down even more.
I love the intellect that goes into layering these things, and the science behind it.
Yeah, I had some really good colorist teachers. One, of course, apart from Dorlin Davis and Jean Heafy at the Marin Art School, Camille Perswadik. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Do you desire to make every painting have deeper meaning, tell a greater story, and be better than your last painting? Well, let me recommend a strategy to achieve just that. I recommend every artist take time to study the great master artists and illustrators and how they composed an image. Uncover their secret design formulas that makes their artwork successful. Now, if you want a little help doing that, I'll direct you to an incredible free resource at artdesignworkbook.com and download your free art design workbook right now.
Besides Ken Oster, I think she's also one of my all-time favorite artists. She's got beautiful color. And when I lived in San Francisco, I would sometimes on Mondays drive up to Petaluma, where she would be teaching her Monday plein air class, Mondays with Camille. and she taught me so much about color as well. And she works with this colorist approach. She has studied with Henry Henschel at the Cape Cod School of Art,
Mm-hmm.
and which dates all the way back to Hawthorne. And I just love these paintings, the luminosity of the color. And it's some people, they don't like stuff that is too bright, and I think I've become a little bit more moderate with my color. I think I used to be even brighter, but I realized for myself that you also need areas in your painting where the eye can rest.
Yeah.
If you have crazy color everywhere, it's not something I would want to hang in my house, because I think it would make me antsy.
Yep. Well, it's a voice, and you want it to sing,
right.
not
So you also
scream.
need some neutrals. If you have some neutrals in your painting, you can make the brights stand out even more. It's all about contrast. Let's say, I am painting a red tomato, and I want this tomato to have maximum punch. I would think about what do I want to surround it in regards to value, but also saturation and color, so that it has the most punch. So I'd probably put something greenish around it, because it's the complementary color to red.
Possibly.
So yeah, I guess I do think about these things more and more. I recently took a workshop with Ken DeVore, and I just loved it, because the things he was talking to me about, they were so individualized to my level. We never talked about color mixing or any of these things, but it was very conceptual, and how to take artistic liberties to make the painting even better. Basically going back to the top of the sandwich. Don't feel like you have to be a slave to your setup, to your photograph, to your landscape, and just do stuff to make it the best you can make it. And I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing, I don't know if you're looking at this painting with the guys with the surfboards. But when you're talking about how do you make, like if you were going to make it punch, you'd put the green next to the red and things like that. You have this beautiful, high saturated blue, low value blue in the sky, right? And when I'm looking at it on my screen, I cover it up with my entire hand, and then I just give it a minute. And what happens is all of that pinky, peachy color begins to fade out of the characters. It's still there. You got a high pink in the back there, but all of a sudden the painting goes and kind of just like its power drains a little.
Yeah.
And then when I release it and I let that blue come back into my eye, all of a sudden it's like it activates the oranges inside that area that just make it now like feel like the sun, the heat. It just increases the temperature, and
I think it's also it balances the painting a little bit.
Absolutely.
Because, there's really not much in that painting. It's trees in the background, a path, and those 4 surf dudes. And if you cover that area in that corner, well, your eye only goes to the surface, but it stops moving around the painting.
Yeah, and I think what it also does is it breaks up the trees, right? And it gives us enough context. Like it makes us feel like they're walking down to the shore.
Yep.
Right.
And also, knowing that you're so heavily into design and composition, I always try to incorporate some lines somehow, or some things that basically are almost like a little arrow pointing towards my focal point. So when you look at the blue and you see it more like an abstract shape rather than, the trees that are broken up, then you see that it's actually pointing right down at those boys with the surfboards.
Yeah, it connects you to the surfboards, and then as your eye goes through, curves over towards the end, it brings us to where the beach would be. Like you feel like they're close. If you cover it up, it looks like a bunch of boys who got lost in the woods.
Yeah, it's true. You're like,
But,
why is that dragging the surfboards?
I know, what are they doing there? They're going to use them for firewood? But the blues that you have in the path, right, with the little dappled shadows, I love that because they're not horizontal. They're on this slight angle, right? That, again, makes us, it allows us to travel this image at a pace that's very relaxing, fun, like, but it's taking us to where we need to go, right?
Yeah.
But the way you have the brush strokes, it's done in a certain way, in a certain cadence that makes us, at least for me, it makes me feel the pace of their walking, right? Like, and it gives me this nice little, like, I'm actually dancing in my seat right now. Like, it's this little nice rhythm, like, tut, 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 and then
it's awesome to get that feedback. I hardly ever get feedback like that, that is so detailed about, how, what it triggers in you, how you see it and how you feel when you look at it. So I appreciate that.
And then there's one other part to it that I really like, is actually the layout of the surfboards themselves, right? There's this beautiful arc that curves through them, right? And then you have it mimicked into three boys in the back. You kind of feel like that guy in the front is the little leader, like he's like, but having those curves, those two major curves there, and then that strong diagonal and the surfboard in the back, it creates this nice, again, like the walking rhythm, like tha tha huh, tha tha, right? Like there's this, like, they're not moving slow, but they're also not running, right? But it's just this nice pace
by the strides they're taking.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Well, even if you cover it up, you'd still kind of feel it. Like if you cover up to maybe their knees or even up to their thighs, you still kind of feel it in the movement of the surfboards and the way that you have them pacing. So,
interesting. Yeah.
So what that tells me is, I know you didn't sit there and plan all that out, right? Most great artists are very intuitive about these things. There is a way to become very intentional about it, but that takes training. But you are absorbing the energy in that moment. And like you said, it's like dancing, right? And so you're kind of being led. So oh, I need to move to the left. I need to move to the right. I need to step forward and back, right? And because you're dancing in this moment, it might be the light that you're dancing with, whatever it is that you're actually touching. You do have a sensitivity that it's actually coming out in a beautiful cadence in your work.
And with that particular painting, the photograph I worked with, it was a photograph I took last summer when I was visiting my brother who lives in San Juan Capistrano in California. And we went to the beach, and you have to walk down on this path. I think it's Dana Point. And we were we were coming back from the beach, and there was this really dark green hedge, and there's those four guys walking down, and I'm like, oh, that was one of those moments, where, like I said before, where my heart just skips a beat, and I'm like, there goes my painting. And my daughter, she knows so well what triggers me in the meantime. She's like, Mom, take a picture. And so I did. And
she screams at you.
Yeah. Take it now. There's your painting. And it turned out in the photograph, the four boys, they were just perfect. I mean, I literally only had to paint them the way they were in my photograph. The stuff I changed around a little bit. They were really walking on asphalt, and this painting was painted for the show up in Fisher's Island. So I had to make it look more like a path, like a sandy path. And so the piece of sky up there, that was not in the actual picture. That was something that was a conscious choice, I made later. Or also that little shadow on the path, that purpley shadow on the right,
Mm-hmm.
that was also a conscious choice to put that shadow there, even though it wasn't there, just to keep the eye from leaving the painting on the path, because my path would lead straight out of the painting. So putting a little shadow there is a way
Ah,
of
nice.
stopping the eye, and then it follows, that little light on the grass and goes back up to the surface. So
Yep.
those are all things I think about when I think I'm done with the painting. Then I take a break, and then with a fresh eye, look at the painting. Sometimes it helps to take a picture with your iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
take a picture of the painting, and then look at it on your little screen, because again, then you see the big shapes rather than the little details, and stuff will pop up. Or, if you take a mirror and stand backwards to your painting, look at it through the mirror, put it upside down, whatever helps you look at it with a fresh eye. And that's where usually those ideas and decisions crop up to really finish the painting. On average, I say about 12 times that I'm done with the painting. And then I'm like, oh, hold on, just there's a little thing here. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. I do that about 12 times.
Well, that's cool. It's good that you know your rhythm, your ways. Wow, yeah. I'm just looking over your work. Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess. Oh, wait. You had a painting in here that I saw was of a fountain, and I was curious if that was in Forsyth Park. If you did any paintings
Yes,
up in
it
Georgia,
was.
was it? Oh, here it is. Yes. Okay.
That's in the archives, right? Was it recently sold stuff? Yeah. Let me see.
Yeah, yeah. And I was on my phone. I was flicking through it, so I didn't know. Let me put a. Oh yeah, it does say Forsyth Park in Savannah,
Yeah.
but I saw that and I'm like, I know that energy. And then,
Is that where you live?
yeah, I went to. That's where I went to school. And so I
Oh, did
spent
you
probably
go to
about 8 years
STAT?
in Georgia, in Savannah.
Did you
Yeah,
go to STAT?
yeah, many moons ago. Um, Actually, right before we talked, I was just on the phone with them because I have to get my transcripts.
Oh,
But
yeah, that was on a workshop I taught last year in Savannah. Oh my God, that was so much fun. I had rented this big old 200-year-old house. Oh, it was so beautiful, and took 6 students to spend the week there. And when I teach, I'm not one of those teachers who take people on a trip and then I paint all week and they're basically left to their own devices. I do a demo here and there, but then I stop painting and I'm only busy with them, helping them with their paintings, walking around the whole time. I usually get the demo out of my system in the morning, or sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't do a demo, but a little lecture instead, like color mixing, values, notans, composition.
yep.
I usually pick one topic. So this painting, the Forsyth Fountain, was literally only one of 2 paintings I painted that week after the workshop was over. I stayed in the morning before I drove back home because that's where my students had painted the day before, and I was just itching to paint that fountain too. So I actually went back there to paint it. The other one,
Was
that's
the
right,
pink house?
the pink house. Yeah, that was a demo
Yeah,
I did the first day when it
I
was
know the pink
rainy.
house.
Yeah. And it was rainy that day, so there was not much light and shadow. So I was looking for something else that has some other light source, and I thought it looked interesting with the light in the entrance there.
I'll tell you a very personal story, and I probably
Yes.
shouldn't say this.
Okay. Now I'm curious. Do tell.
Uh, let's just say I waited for a very, very long time before I experienced certain things in life, and the magic experience that I had with someone who used to work there. So the pink house is a very dear place in my heart.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was Savannah. I miss it. I miss that place tremendously.
Yeah. It seems
Yeah.
like a really cool city, just the mix of history and, all those fountains and, I mean, you discover something around every corner.
Yeah.
I really loved it too. One spot that's also on my list where I would love to go paint is Charleston. But it's not on the horizon yet. I started to travel quite a bit with my paintbrushes since my husband and I became empty nesters. And, sometimes, I talk to old friends, friends that I've made when we all became moms. And, so we're all sort of in the same phase of our life, that our kids have gone off to college. And they're all like, oh my gosh, I miss my kids so much. I don't know what to do with myself. And I was like,
I'll edit this part out.
I'm going to Italy to paint. I go to Bermuda. I was in Brooklyn and New York to paint. I'm all over the place. I'm teaching all these workshops. Sometimes I feel like, oh my God, should I just pretend that I'm so sad, or is it okay?
Should I pretend? Hell no. That's all. Should I pretend I'm so sad? Never pretend. Enjoy, live it up, love it up.
Yeah, I am. And you know what, just the fact that my daughter is very happy at her school and, doing the things she does makes me happy and makes me relax so that I can just do my own art. It'd be different if she would be in a bad spot or something. Of course, she's my priority. But she's happy, so I'm happy. I'm doing my thing. And, she's trying to be my helper next year when I'm going to do that workshop on the Amalfi Coast.
Nice. She's like, yeah, Mom, I'll help you.
Yeah,
just be careful.
I carry stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to go down and talk to all the young Italian men and just find out the best places to go. I'm doing recon research, Mom.
Yeah. Market research, field studies, hearing it from the horse's mouth where all the good spots are, right?
yeah, that's what it is. Well, that's cool. Have you ever painted in the Key West?
Yes.
Cool.
Let me see. I'm not sure. Do I have Key West? Well, you know what? Not Key West, but I was in the Keys in February. I'm friends with a very good painter. She lives in Tavernier, which is right between Key Largo and Isla Morada, so in the, a little bit closer to the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
And she had invited me to be part of a fundraiser for artists that are still suffering in the aftermath of Irma. Nobody's talking about Irma anymore because, of course, they cleaned up the area, but it still has an impact. The hotel industry is still suffering. There was Hawks Key is still closed. There was a beautiful big hotel. They had to let everyone go because it'll take them about 1 to 2 years to, rebuild. And so since the hotel industry isn't doing so well, the artists aren't doing so well because there's less tourists and less people to sell art to, because the locals, they also had to use resources to rebuild their houses and replace damaged property. And so we, Kathleen and Michelle Held and I, and for a day there was a fifth painter, Linda Apriletti. We were painting all week our little hearts out, and then a local gallery actually put on a show for us. They did a beautiful reception. It's called Our Place in Paradise, and sold paintings. Then 50% of the proceeds actually went to artists who are still suffering there. And let me see if I have any of those painting. There was a really funny one actually that I did of a shower head. There was that person who had an outdoor shower, and I just couldn't resist.
Was that the person who was taking the shower?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I don't think I put any of those paintings on here for some reason. Yeah. Yeah, but that was fabulous down there. That pink house that's in the outdoors, the Hopetown Tangle, that was from a trip recently to the Bahamas. And I also went with Kathleen Denis and Michelle Hall to the Bahamas last fall, which was so much fun to paint there. And then there's a bunch of paintings from Winter Park. I always get invited for the Winter Park paint out. Mm-hmm. And so you see all my red shiny things there, the red Harley that was painted. That was a plein air painting, actually. There was a guy who actually waited for me for 3 hours to paint his motorcycle.
Oh, that's cool.
And then while I was painting that motorcycle, I was joking around with these two guys who had come back from a kayak trip, and they were waiting for their bus to take them back to where the kayaks start. You just go downriver and then they pick you up and drive you back. And so they were sort of watching part of the process of that Harley coming together, and they really loved it. And they're like, hey, how do you like to paint a red old fire truck? And it turned out they were firefighters.
Ah, very cool. Yeah,
and they invited me to paint their 1972 Imperial, which is a really old vintage fire truck. Mm-hmm. So I talked to the organizers. There was at the Vikaiva paint out, which is all nature and lily pads and so on. And I'm like, would it be weird if I painted, apart from the Harley, a fire truck? They're like, no, go right ahead. Paint whatever you want. So I was sitting in the courtyard of that fire station for 4 hours painting that fire truck.
That's awesome.
That's the nice thing about the plein air paintings. Every single one has a story, and I will never forget it. And when I look at these paintings, all the memories come back, because it's different than when you just go visit a place. You look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that's nice, what's next? But when you paint there, you sit for on average anywhere between 2.5 to 4 hours, depending on the size of the painting and how involved the drawing and everything is. But you soak it all up.
Exactly.
You hear the birds, you smell the smells, you feel the wind, you feel the sun or rain, or the bugs. You soak it up, and the memories for some reason seem to stick better.
Yeah, you're present,
Yes, that's exactly what it is. You're present. You're not thinking about anything else, which is actually one of the reasons why I love painting so much. It helps me being completely in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really pretty much the only activity where I experience that I'm not thinking about anything else. And I don't feel time passing. It just stops. Mm. And, sometimes I'm painting in the studio and my husband comes home, and I'll be like, I'll be done in 5 minutes. And he usually just goes and starts dinner, because he knows it's going to be, who knows how long. Because I literally don't feel that more than 5 minutes are passing. And yeah, it's nice, because painting is just a way for me to not think about all the bad stuff that's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, because sometimes, I guess as artists, we have a certain sensitivity, and certain things just really, they crawl right under my skin, and then it simmers there and makes me mad or sad or whatever. And, one example was actually, let me see if I have that painting of that Buddha in here. I painted.
Oh yeah, the little green Buddha.
Still alive. There's that Buddha.
Yeah.
That was actually painted February 15th of this year. February 14th was that day when so many kids got shot at that school here in Florida. Mm. And and for the next day, we had planned a paint out. I belong to Plein Air Palm Beach, which is this huge group of painters here in Palm Beach County.
Mm-hmm.
And we have meetups where we all go and paint together. And that day we had a meetup in somebody's private garden that invited us to come and paint.
That's
and
cool.
In the morning I didn't even feel like going, because the painting, it felt so not important in the light of what's going on, of kids shooting kids in school. And I was just super aggravated and sad. And then I'm like, I'm just going to go anyways. And so I showed up in that garden. A friend of mine had told me, you have to walk through the whole garden. And she was right. I mean, it was like this enchanted garden with so many things to see. But there was this little fountain with that green Buddha head. And of course it was shiny because, there was water running down. And I spent an hour and a half in peace. It's called peace because it helped me to just settle down a little bit and just not think about the bad stuff for a little while.
That's beautiful. It's I agree with you. It's I know when we first started, we were like, we're not going to talk about politics. But I'll tell you a little, like, when it comes to like politics, because I think it puts a lot of that negativity in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
I only come out of my cave maybe once a month and allow myself a few hours to kind of absorb what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go back in.
Mm-hmm.
But I spent maybe like a decade where I was like obsessed with it, listening to all the shows and this and that. And at the end, I just felt like so yucky that I just made the decision a few years back that enough is enough, and I'm just going to focus on what my work is to be done on this earth, which is to get out the message about design and composition and work with artists.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you're in your work, or you're in that zone, there's that place of where things feel, like you said, peace. There's a wholeness and like a completeness, and you feel healthy and safe. And and I think that's a good place to paint out of, because once you produce artwork that has that stillness, like that's in a lot of your work,
Mm-hmm.
I always say the vision is to flood the world in beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, one of the great things that artists get to do. We're just not, it's not actually finding beautiful things that we're then copying to show other people, but it's actually like finding a moment, be it in a still life, a figure, a landscape, abstract, whatever it is, but to find that moment, commune with that moment, have that centered peace, and out of that place, paint, cook, dance, do music, read to your children, make love, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of that place, and then your life becomes a work of art,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's cool that you know how to get into it,
Yeah.
you'll find.
But I think you're already a step ahead of me. When you made that decision that you're just not gonna follow politics, on a regular basis, like on a everyday basis. I'm still torn a little bit back and forth between, well, but I have to be informed so that I can make informed choices, because the only way I have to change things is by going to vote. And even though I sound like a German tourist, I also have the American citizenship and I get to vote. So I feel like I have to know a little bit about stuff, but right now, in the political climate we're having, I get easily aggravated.
Sure.
Um, uh, but I mean, when what it boils down to is we only have this one life. We only have this moment right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think slowly but surely I'm coming to the conclusion that I don't want anybody to poison my moment that I'm having right now, because I don't know how many more moments there will be. So I don't want to think about stuff, that might happen or that just happened yesterday again. It's difficult to do, but the painting definitely helps with the being in the moment. And I just love to surround myself also with like-minded people, be it other painters or my students, because they get it. They're all sort of like that. And it's just very almost healing, being with them and spending a couple of hours looking at whatever it is we're looking at and, putting it down on the canvas.
It's interesting because I think with the voting, the politics, I think what happens is there's a strange blend of it's entertaining, even if it upsets us. It's kind of like watching a horror movie.
Yeah.
Although I don't watch horror movies. I'm my ex-wife loves horror movies, but I think probably one of the reasons why we didn't make it in the end was because in 10 years I never watched one with her. It's like, you go watch those with your cousins. I'm not watching a horror movie.
No, I can't watch it either. For the same reason, it sticks with me. It makes me feel so icky. And then I'm thinking, because you and I mean, we're very visual people, and I just can't get those horrible images out of my mind. So the only horror movie that I actually like and that I will watch over and over is The Shining. I think Jack Nicholson is so good.
Okay, that's cool.
But other than that, no.
Well, you know what's strange about that one? I find it far more creative than haunting. Like, there's something about the creativity behind it, the ideas behind that. But like these movies where people are just being sawed up and this and that, and for people who are highly sensitive like we are, that's I don't think people get how damaging it is to us. Like we can visualize all kinds of things, and like you said, you can't. It's so hard to get it out. To get it out of you. Yeah.
No, when I want to be entertained, I find it very difficult to understand how you can get joy out of watching all that horrible stuff. How that can entertain you.
It's a German word. What do you mean? What's the German word that means you get joy out of watching other people get pain? Freudennacken or something like that.
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude. How do you say it?
Schadenfreude.
Yeah, well, there it is.
Yeah. No, I just can't relate to something like that. When I want to be entertained, I either need somebody to make me laugh or make me think or show me something beautiful.
It's interesting you say that because my favorite kind of movies, I'm 42 and I feel weird saying this, but are chick flicks. I love romantic comedies. And I never understood why. I sometimes tried to figure out, I'm like, why do I do this? Like, I'll watch them by myself,
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's for what you just said. It's entertaining, but there's comedy, right? It's usually a subtle kind of comedy.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's just a beautiful story. There's a moment where they fight and then they make up, but it is predictable. But if it can make me laugh a couple times, make me think and hope, hope it's romantic, and then to have just that sense of beauty throughout, like, oh, that was a beautiful story, that was a beautiful thing, the combination of all that, it's always my go-to movie, and then after that, let's watch some action.
So have you watched The Book Club then?
The Book Club?
Yeah, that was the latest chick flick.
Oh, really?
Diane Keaton and God, what's her name? I'm blanking on the other names. It was really funny. Chick flick.
Book club.
And if you want action, then you have to go see Jurassic World.
Oh, the new one?
Yeah, we went last night because we're all still jet lagged.
Oh,
And we
okay.
had to find something that would keep us up longer because right
You're
now
funny.
we just want to go to bed at 7:30, but then we wake up at 4. And so we're like, okay, we're going to go watch Jurassic World. And oh my God, it was, I
It was
was sitting
good.
on the edge of my seat the entire time, even though I'm not even usually into dinosaur movies or any of that, but it was really good. So you're going to go and
That's
see it.
awesome. I'll take my son to go see that.
Yes.
I'm going to leave you with this. I want you to go look at this show. It's called Two Greedy Italians. Okay.
Okay.
I absolutely love this show. And you can watch it on YouTube. I think that's the only place I've ever watched it.
Okay.
But it's about this older chef and I think it's like an apprentice of his, but they're both older, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've spent 20 years, and they're very close friends, and But he was I think they were both from Italy. They moved to London, I think maybe it was France, London. But he's this famous chef, and what they do is together is they go back to Italy after 20 years or whatever, and they go through the towns and the cultures, and they're always making food, and they're talking about the food and the culture, and I think the way that you were pronouncing the words, the joy that you have when you talk about Italy, I think you would absolutely love this show.
Okay. Two greedy Italians.
Two greedy Italians. Now, one thing about Italians that we think of is that they're highly sexual people, right? So don't be shocked that these are two Italian dudes, and they have this amazing banter with each other. Like I think in one of the shows, the guy even hired an escort for his old friend. It was his birthday or something. They didn't do anything, but because he's a gentleman. It's just funny. The camaraderie between these two guys and the stuff they talk about with such passion, if it's wine or women or food or culture or heritage or travel or whatever, it's just all passion, but extremely intelligent, and it just feels so authentic, and I think you'll just absolutely love it.
Oh, great. No, I'll check it out, and then I will want to go back even more. I just love the Italians. I think it would be nice, down the road just to have a place there. I don't know, renovate an old barn, have an artist retreat, have people come visit and paint, and I don't know, sit in the middle of the vineyard stomping grapes.
I love that dream. I was just telling someone today, almost word for word what you just said, but instead of Italy, it would be Portugal. Like, but the same thing, my goal at some point here, by the time I know the time, by the time my son turns 12, I'd like to buy a farm with some outbuildings. And when I used to live in a city, I had a carpenter, and he had two sons, and his sons never really wanted to learn his trade. And he learned his trade from his dad. And so I said, Ray, when my son turns 12, you're going to be his master carpenter, right? And you're going to teach him how this is done. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, by the time he's 12, I have to have a farm where he can have buildings to work on. And then my daughter, I call her my architect, and my son's my builder. So she'll design the spaces, and then they'll build it,
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. So that's like, I don't really know how I'm going to necessarily pull this off, but I got, at least 4 to 5 more years before, my deadline.
Put it out to the universe and
Absolutely.
it happens. Trust that it happens.
So it sounds like a lot of us have this very similar kind of dream, where we provide a place for like an artist retreat. And so, okay, yeah, it's going out. It's going out. Manon, did I say it right?
Yes.
Yes,
Really well.
Manon. I think you should do a show called Manon Mondays, right? Manon Days. It was awesome talking with you.
Likewise.
I thank you. I thank you. I learned so much. You gave such tremendous, wonderful stories. And so, how can people connect with you?
I have a website.
Mm-hmm.
And on the website, there will also be a link. You can send me a message, and my phone number is on there too. So the website is www.manonsander.com, which is MANONSANDER.com. Or you can shoot me an email at manondesigns@comcast.net, which is MANONDESIGNS@comcast.net. Or you can simply call me at 415-606-7685. Or you can also find me on Facebook or Instagram. If you just put Manon Sander in there, you can find me. So lots of ways to connect with me.
And if you're spending time suspended between the sea and the sky, smoke signals work very well.
That works really well. You can send me a homing pigeon.
Oh, yes, a homing pigeon. That's perfect. Blot out the sun. A homing pigeon. That's awesome. And I'll add that stuff to the show notes so people can just click on and go over and check out your stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Awesome. Have a great one. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. But the pleasure was entirely mine. I loved the things you said, your input, your perspective. I can't believe we spent 2.5 hours together.
It goes by so fast, right?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Victor. It was really nice talking with you, and I hope that your listeners will enjoy this podcast.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.
Do you desire to make every painting have deeper meaning, tell a greater story, and be better than your last painting? Well, let me recommend a strategy to achieve just that. I recommend every artist take time to study the great master artists and illustrators and how they composed an image. Uncover their secret design formulas that makes their artwork successful. Now, if you want a little help doing that, I'll direct you to an incredible free resource at artdesignworkbook.com. That's right, I created a 177-page workbook for artists with lessons and drills that will teach you how to see the secret design formulas by master artists and illustrators. So go to artdesignworkbook.com and download your free art design workbook right now.